Hi! Welcome to this part of my guide and review featuring the Mythic Game Master Emulator, 2nd edition. If you haven't seen the other parts of this guide and review, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about the end of scene bookkeeping. It's your call when to end a scene, but usually a scene ends when the primary action in that scene wraps up. Before you move on to the next scene, you have a few bookkeeping tasks to do. The end of a scene is the time to add threats and characters to your lists if they were active in the scene. Think about the scene that just played out and add any threats or non-player characters that seem important to the adventure. If any threats or characters already on a list played a part in the scene, add an entry for them as well. This creates wait lists that make important elements more likely to reappear in your adventure. Once a specific thread or non-player character has filled 3 slots on its list, don't add any more entries of that element, even if it's important in a later scene. You can consider a thread or character important to the scene if it was invoked by a random event, or something meaningful happens in a scene that involves the thread or character. Threats are goals that your player character is pursuing. You can add any thread to the list that you want, even if it hasn't come up in a scene. While adding lots of threads that interest you can make for an expansive adventure, there are also good reasons for keeping your threads list sparse. The more threads you have, the more options are available for random events. You may like having all that potential for plot twists, but if the plot is centered around a single core thread, those extra plot lines may detract from the focus of your adventure. You can add just about anything to the characters list, from individual non-player characters to organizations to geographical areas to objects. If it has some level of activity and can act for or against your player character, you can add it to the characters list. Editing your lists after the scene is over means you don't have to pause the action, but it's not a bad idea to update them as you play if it doesn't slow things down too much. Adding or removing threats and characters during a scene means those elements will be available sooner for random events. It also makes bookkeeping easier since you don't have to think back on the scene to remember which threats and characters stood out. Mythic lists can get messy over time. Threats get added as you come across new goals. Characters get added and so forth. If you max out a list with no room for new entries, it's time to clean up. Get a fresh, empty adventure list sheet and copy over the threads and characters you want to keep, with a single entry for each element. Cleaning up your lists is a prime opportunity to edit them in other ways as well. If you think a thread or character should be removed, go ahead and do it. You can also consolidate less important characters into a single group entry to free up more space. Your new revised lists give your adventure room to continue evolving. Review your threats and characters lists and remove any elements you feel are no longer relevant to your adventure. Removing a non-player character doesn't necessarily mean they've died. Characters can exit the adventure for all kinds of reasons, including that you've deemed them no longer important to that particular adventure. The same is true for anything else. The final bookkeeping task is adjusting the chaos factor. Think about the scene that just happened and decide whether you think the player character or characters were in control of events. In other words, whether the scene was a success or a failure for them. A scene that was mostly within your player character's control gives the chaos factor a -1 modifier, lowering the chaos of the adventure, while a scene that was mostly out of their control gives the chaos factor a +1 modifier, raising the chaos. An important thing to note is that the default rule for the chaos factor is to increase when a scene wasn't under player character control, and decrease it when it was. If you prefer, you can flip this concept on its head. That is, the chaos factor goes up when a scene goes well for the player characters. Now, when it comes to random chaos, another way to handle the chaos factor is to skip the process of evaluating how well the player character or characters did in a scene, and simply let the dice decide how the chaos factor changes. At the end of a scene, roll a d10. If you roll equal to the current chaos factor or less, give it a -1 modifier with a minimum of 1. If you roll more than the chaos factor, give it a +1 modifier with a maximum of 9. With this method, the tone of your adventure will shift at random intervals, based on your chaos rolls from scene to scene. And this concludes this part of the guide and review. In the next part, we are going to talk about the big scenes example. As you can see, there are still plenty of options when it comes to handling the base concepts of Mythic, but when it comes to bookkeeping, it may seem a bit complex at first, but it will become routine or normal as you employ the Mythic Game Master Emulator. It's all about practice. Thank you for watching this part of the guide and review, and thank you for your likes and your comments. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.